Since this is, I won't say the most important session of the summit, but the most important session in my mind in the summit, I want to get us started right away on time so we have our full 60 minutes. It is my pleasure to introduce Kevin Connors, Managing Director of the Suzu Crown Exchange, to kick off Learnings on the Road to a Million Coaches Trained. All you.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. Thank you for the applause. Peel behind the curtain for a moment. I should know in the prep for this discussion today, Jennifer did tell me I would have walk-on music. She lied. Yes. That is a kind way to put it. She lied. So maybe next time, but thank you, Jennifer. Jennifer and the Aspen team has been a good friend to myself and everyone on this stage, and we're very excited to host this conversation around lessons learned on the way to 1 million coaches trained. So as Jennifer said, my name is Kevin Connors. I'm the Managing Director at Suzu Crown Exchange. We are a grant-making foundation whose mission is to prepare young people to thrive in a rapidly changing world. 15 years ago, we really made a promise to fund the most promising but underutilized solutions that help young people thrive, the skills and supports youth need to combat an epidemic around loneliness and social connection, to overcome a youth mental health crisis, to build the life skills that help them achieve long-term academic and health and economic outcomes. And in 2018, we found our way into youth sports. Grateful to the folks on this stage, to our friends at Aspen and so many others who helped us understand the unique power of youth sport to really achieve those outcomes. And as everyone in this room knows, with 40 million kids and 6.5 million coaches, youth sports are really a sleeping giant in this effort to help support a generation of thriving young adults. So it's important and exciting and urgent for us from a philanthropic point of view. It is also deeply rewarding for me personally. I believe this panel knows I've coached in a couple contexts. I've been a head varsity baseball coach at a Title I school in St. Louis. I am currently an assistant T-ball coach for my 5-year-old's Park District team. And I've come away from those experiences with 2 insights. Number 1, no matter the context, good coaching is good coaching. And number 2, it ain't easy. So we are joined by an incredible panel today to talk about the ways that their organizations and the broader Million Coaches effort is supporting coaches all across the country to support a full generation who is ready to meet the emergent needs of the young people they coach. We are incredibly grateful to be joined by 4 leaders across youth sport. We have Jessy Newman from the American Institutes for Research. Jessy will be sharing some preliminary findings that AIR has conducted after studying the work of the Million Coaches Initiative over the last 4 years. Those findings are hot off the press, released today. We also have Kelsey Moore from Nike's Social and Community Impact Team, who's the director of youth sport there. Suzu, Cornella from the United States Olympic and Paralympic Community. And Brian McFadden, my Park District National Rex and Park friend, sending me all the information I need as that T-ball coach. So as you can see, we have a diversity of perspectives represented here today, and I think that's symbolic of the types of experiences young people have every single day in youth sports across America. Before we dig in to the research that Jessy will share, I actually want to ask Kelsey, Suzu, and Brian to share just about the basics of their work. So the trainings that their organizations have been leading and why it's important to them. So Kelsey, if you could kick us off.
Sure. Thanks, Kevin. Hi, everyone. Great to see a lot of familiar faces in this room. My name is Kelsey Moore. I'm on the Social and Community Impact team at Nike. And here today, I'm going to be talking a lot about how to coach kids and coaching girls, 2 of our coaching resources, and the impact of the Million Coaches Challenge. So really excited about that. Nike is really committed to the future of youth sport. And for us, our vision is a world in which all kids truly feel like they belong in sport. And we're focusing on access for all youth with a particular focus on girls, a positive sport experience, which we know starts with quality coaching, and removing societal barriers, which often prevent kids from even getting to the starting line. That work is incredibly integral to our overall Nike mission, which is to provide inspiration and innovation to every athlete in the world. And there is an asterisk on athlete, because we believe if you have a body, you are an athlete. In other words, for us, sport is for everyone. And we want to help make that true for all youth. And we know that coaches are absolutely critical in making this happen. So we kicked off this work in 2018, inspired by Project Play, in one of the 8 plays, which is Train All Coaches, to create the How to Coach Kids course. We did this together with the US Olympic and Paralympic Committee, and that launched in 2018. We knew that there was a need for free, accessible, engaging, and useful resources for coaches to just teach the basics of how to coach kids, regardless of what sport they were coaching. And so we designed How to Coach Kids to do 3 things. First, to inspire coaches to really understand this incredible opportunity that they have to impact the kids that they're coaching. Second, to build their confidence and to really make them feel like, we got you. And third, to give them useful and actionable tips and tricks that they can put into practice with their programs every day. In 2019, we then launched Coaching Girls, which is focused on equipping coaches to understand the unique challenges that girls face in sport and helping them build a lifelong love of sport for girls. So both of these courses are for coaches, all coaches of kids age 7 to 12, but in particular useful for new and novice coaches. And together with the USOPC, we've really partnered with many organizations to drive reach and impact through these courses. National Recs and Park is one of those partners, and some local parks agencies across the country, I9 Sports, multiple national governing bodies, and as of today, Team Snap. So all of these partners represent huge opportunities for us to continue to drive impact, reach more coaches, and ultimately help kids reach their full potential.
Thanks, Kelsey. Suzu, what are you working on at the USOPC?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Suzu Cornella, Manager of Coaching Education Programs with the USOPC. A lot of the work that we do is revolved around training coaches, and over the years, we had been getting the question from coaches and coach developers all the way from the grassroots level up to the national team coach level about sport agnostic resources to help them better connect with their athletes. We're fortunate that many of our coaches knew that this had a positive impact in their team dynamics and their performance. But we have a really interesting landscape of many different sports with national governing bodies. So we needed to create something that would work for all sports and all levels. And so thankfully, with the support of Susan Crown Exchange and Million Coaches Challenge, we created the course Connection-Based Coaching, which was specifically designed for NGBs, but also free and available to anyone who would like to use it. Around the idea of helping coaches better connect with their athletes, social emotional learning skills that they could put into practice, and with the unique lens of Team USA perspective. So it uses stories from athletes and coaches and staff, all about their experiences and how they actually applied those skills, how they used it, how it shows up for them in their practice as a snowboard coach, to track and field, to climbing. And yeah, so that's online, free and available, and it's 3 30-minute online courses for folks.
Thank you, Suzu. Brian, you're working on the other end of the spectrum, right? Volunteer coaches primarily in communities across the U.S. through the Parks and District system. Can you share a bit about what you all are leading?
Sure, it's an honor to be here, first of all. I'm Brian McFadden from the National Recreation and Parks Association. As you know, as Christine talked about earlier, we were probably the second largest youth sports provider currently, with over 40 million kids coming through our system. And so with that, we saw the need to actually help train up coaches, because what we were seeing is, with this big opportunity, we also seen that there was more of a bigger opportunity to get coaches trained and keep them in the sports system within our Parks and Recreation. So we've seen over 83% of coaches, 83% of agencies say that training coaches is probably the biggest problem, a challenge, pain point that they see. And thus, we partnered with you last year to see, give them the tools and the equipment so that they'd be able to thrive within their youth sports ecosystem and their environment. So some of the partners that we have are Positive Coach Alliance, Center for Healing and Justice Through Sport, how to coach kids, and then also U.S. Soccer Foundation. And then we also understand that everyone learns differently and has time constraints at certain times, so we give them 3 different modalities, which is virtual, live in person, and then also self-paced, so that we can catch a wide net of coaches and professionals, because we also think that park and recreation professionals do 100 jobs all the time, and so that this training is applicable not only to just our volunteer coaches, but to our professionals, who can then be the engine to then drive the actual teachings of these trainings to even further to where they can actually build upon for the kids.
Thanks, Brian. I mean, one of the things that I recognize quickly is each of your organizations are really working across the youth sport ecosystem with different types of coaches and different types of environments. But what we've learned from each of you over the last 4 years is that there is need and demand in each of those spaces. A few years ago, the National Coach Survey was released. More than half of coaches report feeling unprepared or unsupported in supporting the diverse needs of their young people. The initial data point that was the impetus for the Million Coaches Challenge was that less than 1/3 of coaches had been trained in youth development practices or anything really similar to that. And so there are these opportunities to raise the bar and help coaches be the coach who they want to be, to level up their practices, and each of you are doing that in your own unique way. Along that journey, AIR has been here, studying your efforts, collecting your documents, surveying coaches, learning what's working, what the impact looks like. And so I'd like to hand it to Jessy to walk us through some of these preliminary findings for the Million Coaches Challenge.
Awesome. Thank you, Kevin. Hi, everyone. It is super, super cool to be here. I would not be here or be able to talk about any of this if it wasn't for the 18 Million Coaches Challenge partners. I see a lot of you out there. You should raise your hands right now and everyone clap it up for them. It is not easy to do what they are doing, and I'm really, really excited to be here and share some of the findings from this ongoing 4-year mixed methods study. Well, anyone who wants to nerd out about methods with me later, you can find me at the reception. So before we dive into some of the findings, which will be in a brief that everyone will get later, so you can read all the great detail, I wanted to start by celebrating progress. We're 4 years in, we've got a year left to go, and the partners have trained more than 730,000 coaches across the country in youth development and related practices. So I feel like that gets another round of applause. This is really important work that they're doing right there. And they've made a ton of progress. All the partners entered into the challenge in many different ways, right? Some of them had trainings they wanted to improve and iterate and expand access to. Some didn't have training at all, and they were developing it from scratch. And so it's really been an honor to watch all of your journeys and to be able to learn from you. I'm going to share a few findings, one of which relates to the context for this work, right? They've trained more than 730,000 coaches in this really fragmented landscape. And, this was a question we had through the study, right? What are the contextual factors that are influencing the field of coaching and youth sports? And so we'd always planned to ask the question of the Million Coaches Challenge partners, but one thing that I observed pretty early on was that when we asked them about other things, like what went into developing their training or their measurement and evaluation efforts, their answers were in context, right? Well, because the youth sport field is, or because we're coaching in this kind of environment, right? It became very clear that you really can't decouple the other things that we're learning without considering the context. And I promise you all this data was collected well before this morning, but I think what you'll see on the screen in terms of what this context is like should sound very, very familiar to what we heard in the plenary earlier today, right? I mean, I think as a field, we're really coming together around some of these issues, this fragmented landscape, this lack of a system, capacity issues, and this overall dominant mindset that sports is really about winning and nothing else. And I think what we've learned from the Million Coaches Challenge partners and what is coming through these trainings is that there's more to it than just winning. And actually, it's not a one or the other, right? They work together. And this is how we build strong, whole athletes. We also have found through the implementation study that these trainings have been received very positively by coaches. We asked them, there's prior research that shows that training can influence coaches in a number of different ways, right? It builds their confidence. It helps them learn new knowledge, build new skills. It eventually leads to practice change. We need practice to change so that we get different athlete outcomes, right? So we've been surveying coaches every 6 months after they've participated in training to understand whether and how these trainings have been influencing them. And I think, across the board, we asked them about a number of different practices. Coaches report that it's helping to build their confidence. It's also helping them learn new knowledge and skills. And for those coaches who told us that they have already changed their practice, we said, okay, tell us how, right? Tell us more. Tell us a story about that. And we've seen some really, really cool stories from the field. Coaches report that they're connecting with athletes. They've shared stories about how they're listening, how they're asking questions, how that has enabled them to coach athletes from different backgrounds, right? To really understand them in ways that are whole, right? Not just as the athlete. They're changing how they communicate with athletes, right? They've talked about taking more responsive approaches. And I will tell you, having taken every single training that is offered by the 18 partners, those kinds of practice changes align with exactly what we saw in the trainings, right? So we're seeing that connection between what they were trained in and then what they reported that they're doing. A lot of the coaches that we heard from also described resulting outcomes and impact for youth athletes, right? Which is really why we're doing this. The athletes that they coach, they feel like are experiencing more joy in their sport. They're staying in sport, right? They're playing longer. They're coming back year over year. We saw that for coach retention too, for what it's worth. And when we asked coaches who reported that they have seen outcomes, okay, again, I like stories. Tell us what you're seeing. We're hearing stories about athletes building stronger relationships with each other. One of the big themes that came out of our qualitative data from the survey was that athletes are making new friends with students or, friends from other groups who they might not have connected with, right? Coaches said, I shifted up how I group athletes, and now I see this translating into like English class or something in the school, if it's school-based, for example. And I think that really speaks to what we all want for young people, right? It's not just athletic skill, it's also developing new relationships, being able to communicate better, take on leadership, and experience joy while you're out there playing. So, yay, lots of positive outcomes. We're going to continue surveying coaches and hopefully hearing more about their experiences and the athletes that they coach. Did I skip? One of the other things I just wanted to share, is we've really been thinking a lot about, okay, if there's this training and it's having this great influence on coaches and hopefully on young people, like what does this do for the field, right? What does this mean for a field that is fragmented, where a lot of different entities are really trying to solve for this right now? I mean, all of you, I think we were all kind of having the same conversation. And that brings me, I think, to my last finding about something the partners of the Million Coaches Challenge have really been grappling with, which is like, what does it mean to be a good coach? I'm going to use the word good in place of something else. I can say effective, I can say quality. Everyone, kind of has their own word, but like, what does that mean, right? And what does it mean to be a trained coach? These are things that the partners have been grappling with. I think a lot of folks in the field are grappling with it, but they're really shaping the conversation, and they've come to some consensus, which you can see on the screen. Big takeaway here: to be a trained coach, you have to be trained in the things that make you a good coach, right? And that really is taking a holistic, athlete-centered approach to coaching. It's not like a time-bound thing. It's not like a one-time check the box, you're trained and you move on. Coaches really need a stronger system of supports around them. So these are conversations, that we're going to continue to have. I'd invite others to be part of that, and we'll talk more about it on this panel. And I'm gonna pause there so we can hear from the panel. We'll share some recommendations in a minute.
Yes, thank you, Jessy. We'll come back to Jessy for some field implications in a few minutes, but I want to spend the next 10 or so with the three of you and really unpack what we heard. Of course, this is reflective of the work from the coaches in your communities, as well as the other 15 partners who are part of Million Coaches. So, Kelsey, let's start with the first finding that Jessy shared. And this is around just the context in which we're all living and doing this work, the fragmented system of youth sport. So from your perspective, in what ways has that fragmentation contributed to what effectively is a coach training gap? And the second part is the Million Coaches cohort is pretty diverse. Why has it been valuable, or how has it been valuable to have those different perspectives at the table when trying to close that gap?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. And Jessy, shout out for being the most trained coach ever. Number one trained coach, taking 20 trainings. It's incredible.
It's still hard to coach, by the way.
Yeah,
It's still
and
hard.
it ain't easy. Like, yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the things I think a lot about here is like sport is seeing so much momentum, right? Like whether it's the record-breaking things we're seeing in women's sports, like the energy around the Super Bowl, the WNBA, the upcoming summer Paralympics and Olympics, the upcoming Men's World Cup, like it's an exciting time for sport in our country, and like what a time for us to rally as a youth sport sector. And I think really that opportunity to be able to bring the power of sport to all youth in our communities and really make sure that everyone feels like they are invited in. But in order to achieve this, we really need to sort of reimagine what this looks like, and we need to do this together. And so we have been so grateful to be part of the Million Coaches Challenge, because bringing together experts in this space and what has been such a fragmented youth sports space has been so valuable for us to be able to develop this collective understanding of what a good or quality coach is. And the Million Coaches Challenge learning community has just been incredible. Like we've been able to share best practices and learnings across these organizations who before this time were not speaking to each other or connecting as much as we should be. And so whether that's from learning about online e-training or ways to celebrate coaches, or even just the connections and conversations across the organizations, like bringing together what has been such a siloed space is absolutely critical right now if we want to maximize this next decade of sport impact in our country.
Thanks, Kelsey. Yeah, it very much feels like there are leading organizations and change makers, and we know what good looks like right now. We have plenty of proof points, but to do that at scale, to do that sustainably, we need to think systematically about it and systemically. And so we'll share a little bit more about that later in the conversation, but thanks for sharing that insight. Suzu, I want to point to you for the second finding that Jessy shared, and this was really around the perception of coaches and the effect of their trainings, particularly on themselves. And there's a data point that said coaches who participated in trainings reported positive influences on their confidence, the development of knowledge and skills, and the changes in their practice. So to you, for your coaches, why is that finding important? And what goals did you have for your trainings when you were creating them?
Yeah, I think that is really exciting for us, because it was one of the original goals for the course. Was we were getting this ask from grassroots level coach developers to national team coaches about how to connect better with their athletes. And so showing that coaches are building confidence and they are getting these skills and being able to apply them shows that we're headed in the right direction and that the trainings are worthwhile. I think that we knew that going into it, but to actually see that on the forefront is promising for us and continues to gather momentum for the next couple phases in training coaches with the USOPC.
Thanks for sharing that. I mean, it feels like the confidence is kind of like the foundation from working with each of you and so many across the cohort. Like that is really the building block to do your work and to show up in more effective ways. I think back to when I was a high school teacher, the difference between year one and year two was like less my practice and more my confidence and the way I delivered all of that. And it feels like our trainings, while they're not the end all be all, right? They are the starting point. They are the necessary starting point to get coaches in that mindset. Brian, we also, though, started to see that coaches reported changes or impacts on athlete outcomes. And so 67% of coaches reported that athletes are experiencing more joy. 63% responded that their athletes are developing stronger relationships with other athletes. 71% said they believe it will positively influence athlete retention. So taking a training to become a better coach will make it more likely that their young athletes come back the next year. What, if anything, surprised you about these findings, and what insights do you glean from them?
Nothing surprised me about that, because we know that if you focus on being athletic centric, meaning like you value the kids more than you when you do the trainings, that they ultimately would come back. One thing I think is interesting is that we had a previous survey before, a coaches survey, national coaches survey, that said that there was more concentration on winning at younger ages. And so with that being said, like, it needs to be kind of flipped on its head to where, and this kind of proves it, where kids want to stay more healthy, they want to be around more, they want to basically have a lot more joy within when they have sport, and thus this is why the needs of where we need to focus more on that type of element. So just having this type of things, doing that, having those type of stats reiterates the process that we need to go away from winning and be focusing more on joy and more on fun. And with that, what we did at NRPA is said, hey, we have a youth sports framework to which now we want to start to deliver this and make sure that each park professional knows that this is the most important element when we have kids, is basically trying to emphasize the word fun, emphasize the fact that you want to be able to build on them coming back. That's the most important stat. Not necessarily the wins and losses, but the fact that they will return the next season.
Thank you for sharing that. I think particularly true in a context like the Parks and Rec, right, where we have families showing up from so many different communities across the U.S., kids who are coming for different reasons to those places, parents who are signing up their kids for different reasons, and really emphasizing that youth development, whole child aspect feels right. We're also, though, seeing, Suzu, like in your work, in a very highly competitive performance-based atmosphere, these skills are also essential, right? Essentially, this is a common need across sports, no matter what context. How have you seen that play out with the coaches that you support in your community? How do you balance the difference between on-field performance and the need to build the whole athletes, or do those actually relate to each other?
Yeah, it's interesting because, a lot of the framework of the course itself that we created was just really trying to get folks to understand that impact. And fortunately, we have a lot of folks that do, but coming at it with the perspective of sharing your experience from the Team USA athlete perspective hits home for a lot of folks, I think. And when you think back to your own experience as either an athlete or a coach, and you take that minute to step back and really think about the impact that those moments had in your life, can really bring that to fruition. And then also it shows in the research. We have a lot of interesting data on athlete and coach relationship and performance. And so it's not only better for the athletes, it's not only better for the lifelong pursuit of sport, but we do see it in performance. You do see it at the high end, and there is a really interesting correlation. And I think when you can bridge the gap and connect the two for folks, there's a great understanding there.
Thanks for sharing. All right, Jessy, we're going to come back to you. So the first half of this discussion was really diving deep on the training. What have you all been doing? What have we learned about the impact of trainings? Jessy, from your independent research point of view, you've also had the ability to kind of step back and observe just the youth sports landscape, the work of the 18 partners, and come to some recommendations for thinking about this work at scale. And so I'd like to give you the floor to share
Absolutely.
where you landed.
And I will say that it was really important to us as we were thinking about recommendations and where the work goes from here to think across research, practice, and policy. I sit up here as a researcher who led this study, but in talking to the Million Coaches Challenge partners and hearing things from the survey and just being out in the field as part of this initiative for the last 4 years, it really can't just be a research agenda. So with that, I'm going to put them on the screen in front of you. And the first recommendation that we made is really around, probably won't be a surprise, defining, adopting, some sort of minimum standard framework. What does it mean to do this work? What does it look like? And I want to come back to something Kevin said earlier. Like, we know what good looks like, right? And it actually does work across the many different contexts. There are 18 Million Coaches Challenge partners. There's 30 plus almost 40 different trainings that we reviewed. And while they each take a different lens and maybe have a different focal area, or they're, for a different group of coaches, we were actually able to identify many practice themes. You can read about them on page 5 of the brief when you get it later, that they all have in common, right? We know what good looks like. It's time to come together, I think, around that and to really support coaches and sort of reaching for that North Star. To that end, there's a lot of training that's already out there, right? And as we learn more about what does it mean to be a good coach, a trained coach, to think about this comprehensive type of support that we need to provide in coaches, we need to go back. We need to look at what's out there and make sure that it aligns with what we know from the research, right, to really inform practice. We need to expand access. I mean, I think it's something I kind of glossed over. This is the Million Coaches Challenge. The goal is to train 1 million coaches across the country. That's our first research question. Have we done that? And when we look at where the coaches are, we can see that we're hitting some places really well. We're reaching a lot of coaches. And then there are other parts of the country and other sports and other fields where maybe we're not, right? And so we really need to think about, how do we increase access to training, and what does that look like, and how are we supporting coaches? We have a coaching shortage right now. How do we get more folks involved in this? The fourth recommendation is around investing in coaches, right? We need to build their capacity, build the capacity of the organizations that support coaches, and really work to, shape that narrative around what it means to coach, that coaches matter. I think in some ways maybe that comes first, right? I don't know. We've had this conversation a lot, like it's like a chicken or the egg thing. Which recommendation do you focus on? I say go for all 5 all at once. And the fifth one, obviously, it wouldn't be me if I didn't say, build a shared research and practice agenda. As we're doing this work, it's really important that we learn from it. It supports our ability to tell the story. It supports our ability to continue improving and building this field from there.
Thanks for giving us the quick and dirty take 5 recommendations. There's so much emphasis on these to me because, as you said, we can train 1 million coaches, and it is hard, right? It is taking a lot of collective might. We've seen this cohort grow from initially just 10 organizations in 2021 to 18 now. We have 6 statewide efforts as part of this. And there's still that big question of like, all right, we've trained 1 million. What next? What about that next 1 million? How do you actually reach a future where every coach in America feels empowered to help their young athletes thrive on and off the field? And so I think these are especially important. This is the work of the 1 million coaches cohort this year. Yes, as we chart our way towards 1 million coaches, but specifically, how can we come together as a diverse coalition and make recommendations for the youth sport field? So I want to dig into some of these recommendations. Brian, I'll start with you. That first one that Jessy shared around building a shared understanding of what it means to be a good coach, a quality coach. Why is that an essential step for the field? And what step or what role in particular is NRPA playing in that conversation?
Great question. The reason why that's important in the field is because we get the chance to measure exactly what is needed for our young people to thrive. We often see about the winningest coach. We often see about things from that perspective, but we don't necessarily understand from how to create safe environments, how to do these things. And now that we have this research, have the ability to have these trainings, have that stuff, have those qualities in there, we now can be able to instill that and actually measure those qualities. For NRPA, what we're doing is like I mentioned, we have our framework to which we now enforce all these qualities and try to advocate on behalf of the field to say, hey, we need to have youth sports to look like this. If you're permitting in your space, this is the way it should go. If you're actually programming, when you get volunteers, we should train and support those volunteers so that it can look like this as a product. We want to be able to ensure that like you said, that we have a bunch of diverse backgrounds, diverse kids that's coming to the space, and they feel welcomed and appreciated for choosing Parks and Recreation, but also any other partner within youth sports, and want to continue to build on their experiences over the course of time, not just when they're 1 year that they're there or that one season. And so by being able to harp on those qualities and ensuring that everyone understands those qualities, it becomes a better environment for all youth to thrive within youth sports, and hopefully we can continue to see them go beyond that age 11 in which we see the drop-off rate is.
Thanks for sharing. So shared understanding, shared expectations. Suzu, the USOPC has been a leader in this space for a long time with the American Development Model, the Quality Coaching Framework, like having these kind of this shared language for your community. How has that helped you engage your community and build, support systems around that?
Yeah, thanks. I think that this is a question that a lot of folks in the field have been working on for years and years. And yeah, fortunately, we've had working groups and GB partners and experts over the years create the quality coaching framework and more recently the quality coaching principles that speak to that, and the parenting framework. And yeah, we try our best to really supply resources for NGBs to then be able to take into their own sports and as experts in their sport to tailor it to what their needs are. We specifically had the ask to take the framework and bullet point it down into the principles. So now folks can take that and actually see what this principle looks like in action, how they apply it. And yeah, we've seen good support from national governing bodies using those and being able to implement it into their specific needs for their sports.
Thanks for sharing. So what excites me so much about this work is as much as this effort has been about training and developing new trainings and bringing trainings to 1 million coaches, I've also heard all of you on this stage say in one point or another that it's very much not about the training, right? It's just the starting. It takes more. And so part of that equation is actually our own perception of coaches, whether I'm a coach myself or I'm a parent and I'm thinking about my child's coach. How do we think about elevating the perception and role of coaches? And Kelsey, I'm curious with your work, like what is the role of training in that? We heard some data points earlier around confidence. Like how can we help coaches think about themselves in different lights potentially in their role of the child's development?
Yeah, absolutely. One of our main goals with How to Coach Kids was really to boost confidence and help coaches feel this we got you feeling from us. And so at Nike, we're committed to inclusive coaching, and that's through increasing the quantity, the quality, and diversity of coaching. And similar to what we hear all the time from girls in sport, we're hearing the same from women in sport, which is that they need to feel competent before they feel confident. And so there's always been this need, or we've felt like there's this opportunity to build engaging and accessible and free and easy to find resources that's going to not only reach more coaches, but really ultimately help boost their confidence, and in particular, female coaches. I think the other piece that we're hearing beyond just the individual coach training is that we hear from coaches all the time that they want more. They want guidance, they want support, and they want to network, right? They want to connect with others. And so one of the things we've heard from a lot of the partners who utilize How to Coach Kids is once their coaches take the course, which is online independently on their own, they're bringing the coaches together, and it's become a really valuable tool for them to discuss the learnings and reflect and sort of build this common understanding of what it means to be a good coach in that organization. So I think that more robust support around not just the training, but this training as a starting point is a huge opportunity.
Can I piggyback on that?
Absolutely.
And then also one thing I think is an indirect benefit that we've seen is that coaches are coming together. So like you mentioned with How to Coach Kids, we had an agency that did a buddy system. So it was a more experienced coach came with a younger coach. And then we would never have done that if it wasn't for this training platform, because the fact that we understood that this coach needed some extra needs while the other person had the experience and understanding how to build on that can do it. And then another one was the fact that we have a learning community within our grantee system. And so all 30 agencies that get awarded from us come together on a 6 to 8 week process to talk about exactly what they're experiencing, and then also any innovative ways in which they go about to learn to tackle certain type of needs a little bit differently. And so just having that, some people said, is even better in addition to the trainings. So I agree with you, Kelsey, that as far as the trainings are important, but also having a network to where you can have trusted coaches to go and talk about their experiences is just as important.
There's a culture that you're building, right, with your coaches and in your communities, and that is reflective of all the stakeholders who are a part of it, right? What parents think about their coaches, what coaches think about themselves, what athletes are expecting. And so, yes, having the baseline knowledge and skills feels like the starting point, but then building out the rest of the support system feels really crucial. And so we have seen that show up in some of the data from AIR. One of the recommendations is to invest more robustly into coach development. So not just coach training and ensuring that all coaches have access to high quality trainings, but how do we think about coach development more broadly in the spectrum of that? I'd love to hear actually from each of you, just your reflections on this question. Where do you see this movement going as partners in the Million Coaches Challenge? You're calling to improve the youth sports experience with coaches as that driver. What else needs to be done? Kelsey, kick us off.
Great.
Thank you. Thanks.
I think, as I mentioned earlier, like as we experience and enjoy this unprecedented upcoming time period in sports in our country, the question we have to ask ourselves is, how do we continue this momentum and this movement, and to build that movement for youth coaches and the athletes that they're coaching? And collaborations like the Million Coaches Challenge will be critical for this. All of us are responsible for ensuring that improved coach training and positive youth sport experiences are felt by all kids, not just a few. And at Nike, we're really proud to partner with organizations across the youth sport landscape, from grassroots organizations and parks departments in LA, New York, Chicago, Portland, to some of the larger scale and systems change partners like NRPA, the USOPC, and most recently today we launched a partnership with TeamSnap. Along with these scale and systems partners, I think we feel like there's this real opportunity to set that foundational understanding of what good coaching looks like. And we really feel like impact is a team sport, and the only way forward is together.
Yeah. Snaps to Kelsey. So from the USOPC perspective, we actually just a couple weeks ago had an NGB coach developer event with the team that brought in all NGBs into one room and kind of asked this question as well. We're excited to say that we have 43 affiliated organizations using connection-based coaching and also how to coach kids. So we're at almost 90% of our NGBs and affiliated sports using some sort of youth development, social emotional learning in their coaching education curriculum. I think in the long run, we want to be able to say 100% are using it in some form. And it's also what was asked in the room last week. They still want more sport agnostic courses. They still want more resources. And so we want to be able to continue to do that work and expand it and build off of the momentum that is a group effort.
And from our perspective, as far as like a youth sports provider, is that we want to be able to use this as a way to get more people into the space. So we know that parents are around within the ecosystem, whether they're a sports parent or there are other ways and other elements of which they do this thing around youth sports. But we would love them to step into the arena and be a coach and have the support so that once they are willing to step into the arena, that they feel supported enough to continue to want to progress in that. So when you're a T-ball coach, you keep going for the next 12 years as opposed to just that 1 year.
Well, you know what keeps me going back to T-ball? It's the early sign-up opportunity for the next season. Right, it's very competitive getting Park District T-ball in my hometown. So you need to coach so you can get your kid on the team next year. Jessy, I want to turn to you for a second. So your work obviously has gone deep with the Million Coaches work and in the youth sports space, but you've also conducted research across youth serving contexts, primarily in the after-school environment, right? So summer learning opportunities, after-school environments, the education space. As we talk about this pivot from training your youth serving adults, coaches in this case, to developing more comprehensive systems to support continuous learning and development, is there anything that sticks out to you from other contexts that we can learn or maybe apply to sport?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think there's a few things. I'll look at the K-12 education space, big picture, so inclusive of after school and summer learning programs and things like that. I mean, I think one thing that the K-12 space does is it extends learning, right? You don't just go to a training and then you get to be a teacher, for example, right? You have to get a degree, and there's continuing education credits, and there's standards and professional credentials, and right, like the learning goes on. And you meet any teacher, they'll tell you, like, I'm a lifelong learner, right? I think if we start to think about coaching in that way, you are always growing, you are always learning. And they do that in community, right? There's a lot of professional learning communities that are built within schools or within districts or, within whatever kind of context that they're in. I think we can do more. Like, I love the buddy system idea, right? Like, one thing that we've heard from the partners is that we can train coaches, but then they need support. Once they're out in the field, they need a coach mentor, for example, or to be part of that professional learning community. So how can we draw on the K-12 space to create similar opportunities for coaches? I would say the other thing, and I'm sorry, like maybe it's like obvious, but I am a researcher. Like, there's a lot of research in the education space that informs how we know how to teach kids and how kids learn well, right? And a lot of that is done through researcher practitioner partnerships. That's actually what drives a lot of policy change, right? We produce really rigorous evidence about how you learn math or reading or civics or science. We do that with teachers. What they learn informs our research, and then eventually we understand how it works, and policy gets crafted around that to support how young people learn. I think we could do the same with coaching, especially as there's this like groundswell right now. Like, now is the time to really be building those partnerships in support of coaches and the organizations that are supporting them.
Thanks for sharing that, Jessy. So one final question to you, and then we're going to turn it to audience Q&A for the last 10 minutes. So if you have questions for all the panelists, any of them in particular, there will be a mic going around in just a few minutes. But Jessy, the last question to you, to build on this idea that we have heard today some very concrete examples of effective practices to support your coaches, like the buddy system, for example, or well-designed and engaging virtual options for coaches to ensure that there's a low barrier access point. But we still need to develop the systems around that at the state level, the national level, in order to really have a future where every coach has access and is prepared to do this well. So one thing that's in the brief that folks will have access to later is that there's a need for coordination across some of these different domains, like the policy space, the research space, the practice space. You mentioned from an AIR perspective that these are interconnected ideas, and I'm wondering if you could share a little bit more about that idea, why we need to act in coordination across those three sectors in order to improve the youth sport experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you'll hear this from me. I think I wrote it in the brief. I would have written it a little bit differently. I think I said that research informs practice and practice drives policy change. Actually, research and practice should have like a bi-directional arrow. They should work together, right? But ultimately, you're practicing what we know works from research, and then that informs policy. And policy really should provide that, like the structure and the supports around it, right? And the cycle continues to go around and around. I think we can be much more intentional about doing that and doing it in partnership. There's a lot of really amazing research that's happening in the field, happening within the university, for example. I think we can do a lot more as we all continue to coalesce around these ideas to get this information into the hands of coaches, to be able to learn from coaches and elevate their voices. I will tell you guys, from the coach survey, I don't think I've ever run a study where I've had as many coaches email me separately in response to the survey to tell me something else about their coaching experience that they didn't feel like they got to get out through the survey. Coaches have something to say, right? Coach developers have something to say. So I think as we move forward, how do we think about systems that connect all of that so that we're continuously learning and growing as a field? What an opportunity.
It's very much a question around systems change. And one example of the systems change that's happening across the country are the 6 statewide efforts that are part of the Million Coaches cohort. It's a very diverse group of states representing different communities across the U.S., the state of Washington, the state of Ohio, Kansas, Indiana, Maryland, and our newest state, which was announced last October on National Coaches Day, was right here, the state of California, in an initiative led by the Governor's Advisory Council on Physical Fitness and Mental Well-Being. So with that, we have a short video.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Siebel-Newsom, first partner of California and co-chair of the Governor's Advisory Council on Physical Fitness and Mental Well-Being. And I'm here with my friend, Christy Yamaguchi, who is also on the council. Big honor to be on the council. Last year, through the Move Your Body, Calm Your Mind initiative, we launched the California Coaches Challenge to train 25,000 coaches in California by the end of 2025. This is a statewide initiative to instill the principles of social and emotional learning, culturally competent practices, healing practices, and all with the end goal of bettering the physical and mental well-being of California youth. So we also want to keep kids in sports longer. We don't want them to be quitting. We want them to be physically active for the entirety of their lives. So it starts with the coaches, and we're so excited to invite you to be in partnership with us.
Yes, and go to moveyourbodycalmyourmind.org to learn more and to sign up for a training.
Well, I think the work here in California is emblematic of the idea of big actors thinking big. It's an important part of this puzzle. And so we're grateful for the first partner and the Governor's Advisory Council for their partnership, grateful to all of you for your work. And over the next 10 minutes or so, we have some time for audience Q&A. So welcome any insights, comments, and questions for our panelists.
Thank you. Such great and interesting data. So I'm Pam Baker. I run the Women's Coaching Alliance, and we work on bringing female athletes into coaching opportunities to coach younger kids. And one of the we really use it as a way for them to develop lifelong leadership skills. So I'm curious, as you did your work on getting more coaches trained, how much of the focus was on bringing in people who don't necessarily aren't the people we think of, i.e. the parents as coaches, versus the training itself?
Sorry, was that directed at me? Yeah, so for connection-based coaching, it's really available for anyone and everyone. And so the national governing bodies kind of took it and to their own. So some national governing bodies actually used it for like volunteer coaches, and some even used it in accordance with like their referees or judges. And then some took it up to the national team level. So it really was up to them about how they wanted to use it, and literally anyone in this room can use it. It was created with the coach in mind. But we know that these skills translate in every aspect of life.
I'll pipe in quickly just for the MCC partners who aren't here. I mean, every partner, I think, approached how they train and who they trained a little bit differently. Some organizations that are part of the MCC actually do have a focal area, for example, like Girls on the Run is focused on bringing in women coaches, for example. I think Jason was back there somewhere, like Positive Coaching Alliance. It's really focused on sport equity and increasing access to sport. They're thinking about places maybe where coaches are less trained and how they get out there. So I think it really depends on the partners' like mission and vision and their goals that they set for the Million Coaches Challenge, is like who they targeted, how, and where they were. So.
Yeah, for us as well, we used what we call a social vulnerability index to kind of figure out ways to which we can kind of touch those particular areas to where it might need the efforts of those trainings. To bring those to them, because they might be under-resourced from that perspective. And so that's how we did it too.
Question for Jessy. Love the research that you did. Look forward in getting the details. Regarding that first slide where you had the United States, then the various states and how many coaches trained, did you do a version of that of coaches trained per capita?
That's a great question. So I want to say one thing about this. Every partner collects data differently. So when you look at the map in the brief, you'll notice it represents about 400,000 coaches that we had the data on to map it. And I saw the trends and I was like, that's really interesting. It looks like maybe we're not reaching people in rural areas. And my colleagues were all sitting down around the table, and we did decide to look at population density. We looked at a few different ways, including youth level population density, and the trends held, right? So it's not just a product of we train fewer coaches in those states because there are fewer coaches, even when we controlled for population density. We should connect later. I'll tell you what some of those numbers look like. There's still not enough coaches trained out there for the number of young people there are. I can't imagine what it would be like if we didn't have the Million Coaches Challenge. So like that, right? Like that's amazing. And also we need to reach more coaches.
Hi, my name's Aaron from Project Play Western New York. And Kelsey, I love what you said about celebrating coaches. And I feel like we've kind of gotten to that point where we work with a lot of the coaches to help change the narrative to celebrate them. We work with the Buffalo Bills, go Bills. Work with the Buffalo Bills and celebrate coaches every year. So I think we have that part kind of figured out. But what I wanted to ask you guys was about coaches recruiting, because I'm a coach myself. I have 4 kids. The only reason I really started coaching was because they were in sports, like you were saying. Like they needed a coach. So I was like, okay, I'll coach. But then, when they move on and change sports, I kind of will stop. So has there been any thought to kind of have a retention method to retain these coaches after their kids are done? They're not playing t-ball anymore. How do you keep those coaches in even though their kids are moving on? And then what methods are you using to recruit new coaches? One of our ideas was to recruit coaches, kids that are athletes and they're done in college, they finish, but maybe they still want to coach if they're staying locally. So those are just 2 questions I had.
I can start. Also, go Bills. Love that I got this question. Thank you. Yeah, I think from a retention standpoint, I'm really going to go back to sort of what I was talking about with this like confidence building and support piece. And if we truly value coaches, then we're going to incentivize them and celebrate them and reward them in the right way. And sometimes that's paying them. Sometimes that's other ways through product or other supports. But I think what we are thinking a lot about is how can organizations put some of that into practice in their system. So it's not just like, yep, check the box, we did this coach training, but they're thinking about that support throughout. And it's the same, like we would all feel the same way in our jobs if someone just like assessed you once a year and then was like, we don't care about you the rest of the time. Like that ongoing sort of support and investment really matters. And so we've heard so many examples from all of the Million Coaches Challenge partners around how organizations are doing that. And I think there's going to be more coming out later on near the end of the challenge where we sort of put together some of these best practices that we've been talking about. From a recruitment standpoint, with How to Coach Kids and the Coaching Girls course in particular, we've thought a lot about supporting female coaches and how can we invite more female coaches into coaching. And similar to what Pam's doing with Women Coaches Alliance, like thinking a lot about teen girls and young women and giving them these leadership development opportunities and helping build that little bit of confidence that they might need to be able to step onto the field. And so I think there's a lot of organizations that are doing this in a really deep way. And there's some ways that we've seen across a lot of the Million Coaches Challenge partners that have been really impactful in doing that we're hoping to continue to share.
Yeah, and another way through like recruitment is what we seen was really interesting was that summer camp for Parks and Recreation is a huge experience for young people. And so what we have done is we've kind of instituted some of those trainings through Million Coaches Challenge to the summer camp young people so that they start getting a foundation of what is needed in order to be a positive coach and things like that within sports context. And what that happens is like we saw in the study, they start to build confidence and thus now they're more eager to want to volunteer when the sports season comes about because now they feel a little bit more competent in what they can do. So that's one way that we've seen that's really innovative as far as using the existing programming that they have within summer camp and things of that nature to kind of cross promote for your use for the sports seasons that they have as well. And then retention, we've seen like they build in this network of community. So like you might have a brother that loves sport but doesn't want to be a coach, but then you have a son that you have to coach. And so, like bringing in like that buddy system to say, hey, I would love for you, I know you love this sport, I think they should show some value and have like a external, another benefit to some of these young people so that they can get some of the valuable skills that you have possessed within the skill, within the sport, but also just in general. So those are just 2 ways we saw from both recruitment and also as retention and efforts from other people.
There's a really unique opportunity from my point of view, and having worked in some other sectors like K-12 education, to present training not as a top-down mandate, but as a perk of the job. Like we are an organization who has your back. We will put you in a position to succeed, whether it's training or ongoing support in your job. And so that is like a slight pivot for a lot of us. We often talk about the downsides of training and will this drive folks away? It could be presented as a recruitment tool as well, right? So there are simple ways, if we can get the framing right, where maybe the things we're doing can actually draw folks in. Jennifer, do we have time for one last question?
I gotta make it right, make it good.
There
Make
we
it good?
go.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm Josh, and I am the executive director of the Fair Game Project. I'm from Omaha, Nebraska, and what makes us unique is we have a MOU with our school district, which is 52,000 inner city kids. And so as I'm sitting, first of all, thank you guys for being here. My question is kind of from a curiosity standpoint. I feel like it's kind of like a LeBron James, Michael Jordan thing. Like, numbers are great, but my eye test shows that Michael Jordan is the GOAT. So I'm saying that to say, out of all of the findings that you had, and I would love to hear from everybody, is there any tacit knowledge from like a lived experience thing when you do these coaching courses and things? Because I feel like I can take all the courses I want, but sometimes dealing with inner city kids, you kind of got to do things a little bit different. Have you guys ever considered that? And what is your advice from a strategy for that? And in comparison to like the consensus of the natural courses, does that also encompass dealing with inner city kids?
Hey, can I start real quick? First of all, Josh, I'm a child of the 90s Bulls. I got you. Michael Jordan over LeBron any day. Let's talk after this. Hey, I'll just share quickly. Look, I think that all of these trainings are comprehensive in many ways. My experience in working with inner city kids was that, the most fundamental thing I had to do as a teacher or a coach was to spend time building trust and relationships with my kids, right? And so that's where like maybe you turn up the dial on some things and down the dial and you personalize some of these training experiences. I needed mentors from other coaches who are working in similar contexts. There were things I could adapt from other suburban coaches, but I had to adapt them. I had to know how those things played out, but really thinking about where the starting point was for your specific community felt like the most essential step for me.
Yeah, I'll piggyback off of that. Like, every coach needs a tool belt, right? So you can't have enough tools in your tool belt. They might not be, you might need a screwdriver, you might need pliers, but you have it just in case you need to use it. And so these trainings give you those tools to which you can use them when you need it. And then if you have to tweak them in order to fit your demographic or fit the needs of the kids, you do so from that perspective.
Yeah, I think that's the tricky part, right? It's like all of this is a contextual fit, like what works best for you. Our course specifically focuses on building trusting relationships. And so the hope is that by sharing the stories of different coaches and athletes that they can see, okay, this is how they built a trusting relationship and this is how they built it. And how will that work in my experience in doing some, processing of your current environment. Is the hope with our course as well. And, something interesting from the Olympic and Paralympic side of, just in Paris, we had, there's a ceremony called the Order of Eco ceremony, and it's a time when an athlete wins a medal, they get to give their coach a medal if they feel so obliged. And when that athlete or Olympian and Paralympian came on stage and invited their coach on stage, most of the things they shared about that coach was these skills, the relationship, the trust, the belief, and also they won a medal. So there's a interesting correlation there between the two, and the hope is that the folks that take those courses will be able to see what fits best for them in their environments.
Yeah, completely agree with the tool belt analogy, Brian. That's it. And it's about confidence, right? It's about knowing, having the ability to understand what the context is and then build those relationships. And I think, too, the other piece that we hear all the time from coaches is like, there's a lot of info out there. Like, where do I go for coaching information, whether it's sports specific or audience specific? And so I think that's one of the things we're thinking about and sort of grappling about too as a sector is like, how do we make it easier for coaches to get that support and to find information when they need it, which is going to help build their confidence and ultimately help them deliver better experiences to kids.
There's literally nothing I could say that's better than what everyone else on this stage has already said. Yes. Clap it up.
If you could advance 2 slides. It is my job to remind you that if you RSVP'd this session in the app, You can then provide feedback on the session in the app. In addition, please join me in thanking this amazing panel. Everyone will be receiving a copy of the brief that Jessy mentioned in their swag bag this evening at the reception. So another reason to come. And finally, at 2:45, we will be back in Zellerbach Theater. It is a 100% credentialed event. So you must have your pass in order to get into the theater. We will be hearing first partner Jennifer Siebold Newsom in person, and for security reasons, this is required. So thank you. That's it.